Hello, and I hope this message finds you well. I wanted to talk today about rites of passage and kind of the value they hold for young people and also the stress they impose and how we can calculate whether that stress is worthwhile and therefore as adults, whether what we're doing is appropriate in terms of initiating young people through these rites of passage. The reason I've been thinking about all of this recently, really for this past week, is so I work at an IB school, which is a rigorous curriculum, and a curriculum that I would say holds rites of passage. And this past week, for the first time, I conducted a significant exam in this curriculum. Now, this is an exam, and these kinds of exams are exams which proffer high stakes for students. Students are seeking a diploma, some of them are, through this program, and if they are, that diploma will net them college credit. And so, for some students, that means they'll have to pay for fewer college courses, which will save them or their parents money. And so it is consequential depending on the kind of future they're seeking, because these certain exams will help determine whether or not they earn that diploma. And so I was facilitating one of these exams, and I observed that the students were very stressed, I was very stressed, and it definitely took a toll on everyone's mental health, for the duration of that exam. It also occurred to me that especially in our secular culture, and public schooling is really an emblem of secular culture in the West. This kind of event is the closest thing we have to a rite of passage. I remember being in high school myself and being very stressed, very weary before the SAT, before the ACT, before AP exams, things like this that, again, seemed very consequential in terms of helping to narrow or select my future. And so these are rites of passage in Western culture. I suppose more broadly or more generally, I should define what I mean by a rite of passage. So to me, this is an event through which a young individual sort of tests their capacity to stand on their own 2 feet, which is to say, to individuate. We get this term from more indigenous or religious cultures. So we have examples like the Vision Quest from Native American cultures. We have like mission trips that Mormons do. We have bar mitzvahs from Judaism. And through all of these events, young people are, yes, sort of forced to demonstrate self-sufficiency, self-regulation, to stand against the world or against nature in some way, and to come out more resilient, to come out on top. And so it's a moment through which they separate from the symbolic mother or father or nurturing figure and become, more of an adult, more of a peer to the adults who've been raising them thus far. Now, again, just to kind of go back to the context, Western culture has a habit of eschewing or even destroying these sorts of symbolic acts. The reason for that is that Western culture is highly skeptical of abstract telos. What I mean by that is any sort of spiritual value that grants life direction or meaning. So, to take the example of a Native American Vision Quest, although this event is stressful, it's upheld by this cosmology that the tribe shares. Beliefs that when we pray for water, we're actually connecting with a God who's going to grant our prayer, things like that, and so on and so forth for, the example I gave from Judaism, from Mormonism, etc. Now, Western culture, and there's a long history of philosophy that would show us this, John Locke, Descartes, etc., empiricism. Western culture challenges these pillars of external or superseding authority that tell us why we conduct these rituals. And at a point, all that's left to us, I would argue, is either habit or force, which is to say convention. Well, we do this because it's what's always been done. Or, you know, the adult saying like, well, I do this because I'm forced to do it in some way. To go back to my example of being in the school, it's like people are evaluating me too in terms of my ability to steer students through this rite of passage. And so I am beholden to a force above me, in a sense, my God. And, you know, I have to then enact this on these students who in turn are performing. So yes, Western culture has lost the undergirding or overarching forces for these rites of passage. And so we're left with, I would argue, kind of shoddy explanations. I feel I'm drifting a bit here, and I guess the impetus of this talk for me is that it's painful to observe students in a state of stress and not be able to remove that stress from them, because in a sense it is appropriate to the situation and to their developmental stage, and B, not sufficiently be able to explain why I am imposing that stress on them. Now, with reference to B, I think if asked, most adults in this kind of role, this kind of mentorship role, which is our secular culture's equivalent, you know, schooling, education, are places where we conduct rites of passage. I think if asked to rationalize these acts, these rituals, most adults would say one of two things. They would say, well, you know, this is preparing you for college, which is preparing you to have a career, and these are symbolic of furthering that trajectory of self-sufficiency that the rite of passage hopes to demonstrate or ready students for. Or they would say, well, I had to do it, this is what we've always done, and so you have to do it as well. Neither of those explanations to me is very satisfactory. The first falls apart because of the obvious ways in which our world is changing. You know, with the advent of AI, with just the metastasization of late capitalism, those sorts of bureaucratic career paths for which modern schooling was designed, they either are disappearing or have already disappeared. And most of us know that. And we're just in this sequence of custom without being able to explain why. Now, the second rationalization, which is, you know, I had to do it, you will too. And I've heard myself saying things like this at points as a teacher. You know, like, I remember being stressed before I took the SAT and I'm fine. That is the same rationale as is used to justify abuse. You know, it's like, oh, my parents did it to me and I'm okay, so I'm going to do the same to you. It is an unconscious passing on of the received mode of indoctrination. So neither of these is very is satisfactory to me, nor are they encouraging, inspiring, you know. I think the real problem that Western culture faces is that actually we would be able to inaugurate a utopia on Earth if we wanted. And we know that, you know, Western culture has sufficiently mapped out the world mentally that we know there are enough resources that if we properly distributed them, we wouldn't need to live in a state of scarcity. We know that if we governed equitably, people would be able to live comfortably, more often and more directly pursue their passions, etc. And so that fact in itself challenges really the necessity of this event of the rite of passage. Why do people need to prove that they can be self-sufficient, that they can stand on their own two legs, when theoretically, ideally, we live in a world that could meet everyone's needs, you know, through things like universal basic income, again, through proper redistribution of resources, through dealing with our environmental problems, which I believe are soluble through both technology and just different mitigating practices of extraction, living in greater harmony with the earth. So yeah, the rite of passage is not necessary in the material way that for most of human history it was, you know? Life used to be much more challenging in those ways. People would face potentially lethal disease on a regular basis, or famine, or things like that. And so they needed more of this ability to stand on their own two legs and this relationship with a God who would save them from events they couldn't control. So to summarize a large portion of what I've said, and I think you can tell that I didn't plan this talk, and I'm not looking at notes over here, I'm just looking out the window, so it's meandered. But to summarize a large portion of what I've said, I think in the West we are imposing rites of passage for arbitrary reasons, reasons that really signal our own refusal to take responsibility as adults for our culture's proliferation. You know, I'm reminded of something Milan Kundera says in one of his books, which is that he says something like, when reason is gone, only force will remain. It's like, we can no longer explain what we're doing. And so at that moment, it becomes actually rather totalitarian. Like, we're just doing it through force rather than through a lucid explanation. So we can no longer explain or justify these rites of passage, and we know for a fact that they're not necessary in order for human beings to survive or thrive. So the question then becomes, why are we doing them at all? You know, are they valid? Are they worthwhile? Now, this might surprise you based on everything I've said so far, but I think the answer is yes, that they are worthwhile. I think even in a utopic world where all human beings' needs are guaranteed to be met, it is still valid for us to have these moments of stress where we come forth as human beings and sort of declare something as individuals, step into ourselves in that way. It's sort of like the existential balance that I would argue is just vital to living a full life that we can see through the lens of different religions, you know? So someone who takes Buddhism very seriously and literally might come away with a sort of ascetic or nihilistic disposition, where, you know, what's the point in doing anything, because in a sense, like, reality is just non-existence and we're sort of withering into the void. And I would argue that's, you know, not the best interpretation of that religion, nor the most satisfactory way to live life. Of course, we don't need to carry, but it's extremely helpful and soothing for human beings to remember that ultimately, on the absolute plane, we are always taken care of. And in a sense, what we do in life doesn't matter. We're just here for a finite span in this body, in this vessel. And we are, you know, decaying all the time. And, you know, whatever we build will turn to dust, and all these sort of like apocalyptic notions. It's important to remember those things, but simultaneously doing things as human beings, relating to one another, taking risks. These sorts of gestures, I would argue, have an absolute value that we could not experience if we were not incarnated. And therefore, those sorts of experiences seem to be part of the purpose of existence. So I feel this is very abstract, and probably most people who listen to this video won't even get to this point or understand it, but whatever, it's like a form of journaling for me. But yeah, I think that the rite of passage serves as a vessel for what human beings are meant to do anyway, which is declare who we are, make a stand, say something, do something. We need a balance between that quality, which exists in the relative realm, and the absolute quality by which we know we are always taken care of, everything is okay, things that we do actually don't hold weight. To reference Milan Kundera again, I'm basically articulating the essence of the unbearable lightness of being, which is these two aspects of existence and the need to keep them in balance. So I'm going to take a sip of water and then summarize and close out. I said at the beginning of the video that I would offer a metric by which to assess the rite of passage, and I think there are a few dimensions to this. So part of it is, does it help students, does it help young people to do what I'm talking about? Does it help them to come into a more coherent sense of identity that they can hold on to, and that they can continue to live into for the rest of their lives? And that is a very difficult calculus, especially in public schooling, especially in these secular institutions, because so often we are forcing students to do things which are not natural, nor especially stimulating for many of them. You know, there are some people, I'm one of them, who are naturally apt at the kinds of tasks school asks us to do. That's part of why I'm a teacher. I enjoyed it. I thrived there, you know. There are many other people who are not apt at those tasks. They have other skills, and the net result of these kinds of rites of passage most often is that they feel crappy about themselves. They feel inferior to their peers. And so I think we need to be able to offer opportunities for those people to demonstrate their skills as well, or we need to be able to really holistically frame things for them in such a way that the net result of these rites is not shame. You know, okay, you may not be good at this particular thing that we're asking you to do, but you have many other talents, and it doesn't say really anything about you as a human being. By the same token, this means we need to deflate the egos of the people who do well at these rites of passage, you know, and remind them, like, it's not necessarily a reflection of merit that you did well. It's more a reflection of a natural aptitude you have that happens to be preferred by this society in which you're growing up, you know? And maybe several generations ago or hundreds of years ago, these aptitudes actually wouldn't have been valued and you would have felt inferior, you know? So like, it's almost a historical accident that this weird game we're playing at this moment in time just happens to suit you. So we need to be able to assess, do these things help young people develop a valuable like chink in or thread of their identity code? And we need to be able to frame the act in such a way that it doesn't cause shame or harm to those for whom it doesn't function well. Yeah, I think those are the two main things. So they really tend toward this larger perspective of, you know, all cultures have had rites of passage. Most of them have relied upon some sort of God who justifies them. In the West, we don't have that God anymore. I would argue we do still worship things without realizing it. Many of us, especially in these settings, we worship rigor itself, which is a way of worshiping force, like I mentioned earlier in the Kundera paraphrase, worshiping that state of stress unto itself, you know. And I think we need to remember that it is worthwhile to come forward as a human being, say something, become an individual, even in a reality where increasingly that's not necessary for us to do. It's worthwhile anyway. It has absolute cosmic value. And it's important for us to remember simultaneously that no matter how we perform in these events, we are loved, we are accepted, and there's a lightness of being too. There's an inconsequentiality to what we do as well. So it's really a dualistic perspective I'm promoting that helps to rationalize without altering or putting away these events of the rite of passage. So thank you very much for listening. I hope that talk is useful to someone, whether it be a young person or a teacher like me who's responsible for facilitating these kinds of events, these modern day rituals. And I hope you have a blessed day. Goodbye.